Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Of all the responsibilities and the activities that I was asked to be part of and to do through this convention, this is the one that I would have most likely to have declined. The responsibility in being asked to introduce this man was quite awesome to me. Clancy has been introduced by many people. People have known him a lot longer than I. People have been around a lot longer than I. And it made me quite nervous until I remembered what I first thought about when we first talked about having Clancy. And I remembered what it was like. And I remembered something that happened to a young woman a few 24 hours ago who was destitute, frightened, very scared, in a lot of trouble. And someone gave her 2 tapes. And one of those tapes belonged to Clancy. This young woman had no hope. She had no place to go. She tried everything. And she listened to those tapes. And I don't remember the words exactly, but I remember very well the feeling. I remember the hope, and I remember just feeling a warm kind of experience for the first time in a long, long time. And one of the more beautiful things that I remember doing was laughing. I hadn't laughed for a long, long time, and I didn't know that I ever could again. And I am very grateful for the people like Clancy's and Liz's who do these speaking things and the tapes that get circulated, because that was a moment for me that I will treasure. That tape is long gone and worn out because I couldn't read, and they said, read the big book, and I couldn't tell you all that I couldn't understand it or see, but I could listen. And I'd never have gotten to thank Clancy for that, and I needed to do that. Clancy, I thank you. Would you come and share with us?
My name is CLancy Imislund, and I'm an alcoholic. I told them not to waste those tapes on people who are destitute. I'm very glad to be here this evening. I'm glad to be a part of the Tennessee State AA Convention. I have enjoyed being here. It's had its ups and downs for me. As sometimes happens, we had a little mix-up at the airport. I sent a note. My travel agent changed my travel arrangements about 2 weeks ago, and I sent a note to Susan telling her that I was on a different flight at a different time. But apparently my letter never got here. So she and Don Roy were out at the airport killing time in the coffee shop waiting for my plane to come in from Dallas while I was milling around getting off the plane from Atlanta. And no one met me, and I just stood there, and I was tired. I had my little bags, little tears welled up in my eyes, and I said, I guess that's all right. They probably had something more important to do. You believe that? Well, I got here, and they got here, and everything was all right. I was very glad I got here and heard Liz talk last night. I always enjoyed listening to Liz talk, and I so much enjoy her talk. I'm going to go all the way to Scranton, Pennsylvania later this month to hear her talk again. I'd go to any lengths to hear Liz talk, if it's convenient. There's nobody else talking. And I really enjoyed Barbara this morning, Black Belt Barbara, who is apparently just some kind of a right-wing fascist Al-Anon pig of some sort. And that's the only kind I like. I'm a right-wing fascist AA pig, so it's I was a little apprehensive what she was going to say, but when she came and said, my name is Barbara, and I'm a member of Al-Anon, I'm not a codependent or a co-alcoholic, she won my heart. I really enjoyed your talk. Incidentally, I learned something from Liz. We're going to try it again tonight. Maybe it's a little soon. But I don't know if you noticed this last. She did something I've never seen anyone do. I never watched Bill Wilson talk. He couldn't do it. Never saw anybody do it. She was able to whip us into 2 standing ovations last night. pretended to be done. We all jumped to our feet. Then she picked up the thread of her story again. That's a good trick, Liz. I'm sure you made Mr. Bailey a happy man. Sorry I missed my friend Chuck. I didn't know there was a meeting here yesterday. And I'm looking forward tomorrow to hear to our beloved trustee from Atlanta, Joe P. And it's been a good convention. And we're all gathered here to do the same thing, to try to find something through fellowship that will enable us to live a little more comfortably in the world. And I assume we are all here for the same reason, because we used to drink with varying degrees of success. And somehow we were driven here. You know, it's a funny thing. The longer you're sober, some people, the longer they're sober, the more sincere they become at their first meeting. You know, you hear people say things like, and then I realized I needed sobriety on an all-time basis. When I came to this program, and I knew I was home. I've been taking new people to AA meetings forever, it seems like. And I'm just waiting for one of those pukes to say, oh, I'm home, I'm home. It's more common to hear them say things like, you mean there's more of this shit tomorrow? Because as has been said, we all come here under the lash. We all come here driven here. No one comes here anticipating anything. No one really wants to be, I don't think, comes to get sober, because we all been sober a lot before we got here. If you are like me, I don't know. I guess there are different types. But I hear people sometimes talk, and they talk about how they were conscious of their drinking, and everything rolled around their drinking. I never focused that much on my drinking. My drinking was just an attendant thing to the other things in my life. Drinking to me was the best. Alcohol is the best friend I ever had. I never had a better friend than alcohol. You know, it hurts me today to hear people get up to the podium and say, that damn stinking alcohol, it was always rotten, it's filthy. It's like hearing somebody badmouth an old girlfriend of mine. You know, she may be a pig now, but she used to be something. You know. And just a year ago this week, I had a reminder. It was just like a letter from home with a check in it. About a year ago this week, I was asked to go over, and I was over speaking at the anniversary of the alcohol facility at the U.S. Naval Hospital at Pearl Harbor. And they asked me a few months in advance. I'm over there in July, first week of July. And the meeting was July 8th, which would be, I guess, a week ago last night. A week plus a year ago. A year. Never mind when it was. But I was thinking about it in the month before that, and the more I thought about it, it sent a little shiver down my spine. Because as far as I could determine, and I have a way of determining it, the way I could determine, I held down my first drink of whiskey. I'd had drinks of whiskey, but I never held them down. I held down my first drink of whiskey on July 8, 1943, on a ship in the middle of Pearl Harbor. And I was talking there at Pearl Harbor, I could look out the window and see where that ship was, that I held down my first drink. 44 years before that to the day. And the reason I remember that is because the next day, July 9th, was my 16th birthday. And I remember on that day I had my first hangover. And now it was 44 years later, and on the next day I turned 60 in Pearl Harbor this year. And I felt in many ways much younger than I had in 1943 on that ship. But what I remember about that, my memories of that have always been momentous in my mind. And being an AA has helped me keep them very green. And that is, on that day, I held down my first drink, and something remarkable happened to me, and I never knew anything remarkable happened to me till years and years later. It turned out that I had a body that was almost immediately responsive to alcohol. But I didn't know that. You know, nobody ever knows that they have an unusual response to alcohol. That I never heard of anybody knowing that, because you have nothing to compare it against. As you're growing up, you find pleasant things and unpleasant things, and they're part of grown up. You find that eventually your parents won't support you anymore. That's an unpleasant thing. They want you to work. That's an unpleasant thing. You You discover sex. That's a pleasant thing. You discover sex brings babies. That's an unpleasant thing. Is that just a series of pluses and minuses that part of growing up? And I discovered alcohol, and the reason I wanted that drink so badly is because I'd run away from home and was on a ship in Pearl Harbor. My mother thought I was up visiting my aunt in Wisconsin. I was in Pearl Harbor early in the Second World War in a merchant ship, and I was surrounded by men. And I was a snot-nosed, dumb little kid from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, who didn't know anything with a face full of pimples. And I tried to drink so they would think I was a man. I wanted to look like a man. And I drank all the way across the Pacific to get there, and I threw up, and they laughed at me and ridiculed me, told me I was a goofy little puke, and all sorts of crap, and there's nothing I could do. You know, they're men, and I'm a little snot-nosed kid. I thought later, I couldn't hit him, I couldn't do anything. The one thing I might have done, I'm glad I didn't think of it, that it killed me. I thought about this later. I might have said to one of these big bullies, I said, "Hey, buddy, lean over." "Yeah." "Take that." Give him a little zit right in the old eye, just to... But I remember taking that drink, and I didn't know it had an unusual effect. And that's what, it turns out that's what this whole thing is about, whether or not alcohol has an unusual effect on you. But you have no way to measure it. So really, it's just data. A few months ago, I was listening to a lovely girl taking her 8th birthday cake. Beautiful, beautiful, seductive, lovely, charming movie star, just so beautiful and so talented. She's in her 40s now. She looks like she's about 22, and she makes $100,000 a week in Las Vegas singing and dancing in those great dramatic roles, and just wonderful. You think, why in the world would anyone like she ever drink? And she talks about why she drank. She talks about when she was sober, she felt clumsy and awkward and unattractive, and she could not do the things the studio wanted her to do. But when she drank, she found out it had a kind of an unusual effect. It made her the way they saw her. And it brought about a change in her life. And eventually it almost cost her everything. But that's why she drank. Something unusual happened to her, but she didn't know it. I sponsor a big boob that used to play center for the San Francisco 49ers in the early 1950s. When they were going both ways and so on. Well, that's regarding substitutions, not sex. But he always talks about how he and one of the guards of the 49 men on the team always had to get back to the dressing room somehow just before the kickoff. Because of himself, he didn't think he could handle that middle linebacker on the other side or block one of that opposing center. But when he had the half a pint right before the kickoff and another one right before the end of the half, he could knock that guy in his can all day long. He got unusual effect from alcohol. Everybody who, it turns out, who has a problem with alcohol has an unusual effect from alcohol. None of them knows an unusual effect, however. And the unusual effect I got that day in 1943 that I remember, because I always remember, because it changed my life around. But it never struck me as anything remarkable. I just thought that's one of the natural parts of life. It did something different. Now, I sometimes go out and talk for AA at service organizations, and I talk at public places, and I talk a little bit about alcoholism. And once I tried to tell a group of service club about what alcohol did for me and that ship, and they just, But anyone in here knows exactly what I'm talking about. It sounds the same, but it's a 180-degree difference. I drank so I would look like a man, and instead it made me feel the way men look, which sounds almost the same, but it's a big difference, I'll tell you, to whether you look like a man or whether you feel the way they look. And I found out later men don't feel as well as they look. So I was feeling better than they were. But I had no way of knowing that. I didn't become a crazed old drunkard then. It was something I added to my lexicon of experience. And I got drunk sometimes, but later in the war I went in the Navy, and then after the war, when the war was over, I got out of the hospital up in Pleasanton, California, and while I was there I'd taken some tests. They gave me a high school equivalency, so I was able to go to college. I was still a junior in high school up in Wisconsin. And I went to college, I got married, and I became a sports writer and got into advertising and public relations, and I drank all this time. And alcohol was the best friend I ever had. Drinking was a great thing. My main problems, as I saw them and I felt them year after year, I have always had a running battle with my emotions, with my feelings of being different, with my feelings of being less than somehow, or superior, it all depends. I think about that many times. Most I look over my life, I've always felt above people or beneath them, but never like them, just above and below. I resent the people above, have always resented the people above me, and I have contempt for the people below me. Doesn't leave you much. But I spent a lot of time. I used to examine myself a lot. I thought that I had been given a gift. The gift of self-analysis that the little people hadn't been given. So I spent a lot of time examining myself and sifting things out. And I discovered there are certain things about me that are different than other people, as far as I could tell. For example, I feel things more intensely than other people do. I can tell that by looking at them. They don't feel things as intensely as I do. They don't react the same way I do. It's easy for you to laugh. You have no idea what it's like. But I'm highly sensitive to things. For example, I can feel a rejection that nobody else can see or feel, but I can. I have intense feeling. Another thing it seemed to me that human beings should have some degree of armor. People have armor against emotions, and as far as I could tell, there were just holes in my armor. Because I know other people have emotions, but there's no buffer in it. I remember sitting in a bar one time joking with the guy, and I thought I was telling a joke, but it wasn't. I said, I guess when I got to the end of the assembly line where they're supposed to put on the insulation, somebody must have said, "Hey, God." I said, "Oh." And I just went by. Because I know that other people have all these emotions, but not as intensely as I do. For example, I feel anxiety. I've always had a lot of anxiety. Now, I know people have anxiety, but I have different kinds of anxiety. Sometimes I get so anxious, I can't find enough reasons to justify that much anxiety. Now, that's hard to explain to anybody. It's almost a blessing when something bad happens. Yes, just I saw that coming. I have a different feeling of loneliness. That's one of the great things has always been a reassurance to me there's something wrong. I know everybody gets lonely. I've read all kinds of books. But damn it, they don't get lonely the way I get lonely. When they get lonely, they go join their little friends and do something. When I get lonely, it makes me depressed. And when I get depressed, I have a tendency to withdraw a little bit, which makes me a little more cut off, which makes me a little more depressed, which makes me withdraw a little bit more. And the net result is, if I get into depression enough, one morning I just won't get out of bed. Just keep the covers over my head. Tell them I got the flu. Screw them. And that's hard to justify to your loved ones. What are you doing under the covers? I'm lonely. Of course you're lonely, you dumbbell. And you can't get an argument because you want to take the covers down. If you're lucky, you can get your hand out of the top of the covers without just giving your last defense. And other people aren't like that. I remember over 30 years ago, sitting at a big advertising agency where I was supposed to be a whiz-bang, a wizard in Dallas, and hearing my secretary out there say, "I was just so lonely last night, I called up Betty Jean, we went to the show and had a wonderful time." And I remember just sitting there thinking, I wish I were simple like you, you bitch. Why have I been cursed by being so intricate? I have a lot of resentment. I have feelings of inadequacy that sometimes get me. I've worked my butt off to get good jobs. And once I get there and get settled, all of a sudden I have a terrible fear one day. They're going to find me out. I don't even know what they're going to find out. But they're going to find me out. They're going to find out that I'm faking it. I have these kind of emotions always, I've drifted into a thing, and I'm sure that most of the people in this room have been in it, and maybe some of you are in it tonight, because it's such a common thing, and you take it for granted. When you're feeling bad, or feeling different, or feeling less than, it's so easy to fall into a trap that you're not even aware of. And that trap is this. They are what they seem to be. I am the only one who has to fake it. They are just them. But I have to play their sick little game and decide what kind of a dance to do for them. And that is really, and it's hard to realize, we all are faking it to one degree or another. You know, we talk about, I read in college all about defenses and personality defenses and so on. And that's just abstraction you write in a test. But that's, people do live behind defenses, you know, because we all do. And we all do them because, as has been said by philosophers, if we all lived as our inner feelings would tell us, we'd kill each other off in a generation. But we live behind defenses. That's how societies must function. And they go from very extreme sophistication to very crude. I remember I used, among the more sophisticated ones I used to use was my intellectual defense, such as, you know, what we've just been talking about. Let me ask you, did you ever read Nietzsche on that? No, I didn't think you had. And there's all kinds of defense mechanisms. You get way to the other end, and there are guys saying, I got a new Harley, and I'm going to drive it up your ass. Same thing. Just keep people at arm's length. Don't let people know who I really am. But when you're in the middle of it, you don't know that you're just one of a bunch. You know that your case is different. And I've always felt these things intensely. And many years ago, I went into psychoanalysis. They say, no, you shouldn't go to psychoanalysis. I loved it. I made breakthroughs that would send shivers down your spine. This was over 35 years ago, if you can imagine. And I discovered that I had been deprived as a child. I had never known that till the 1950s. That's a very depressing thing to learn, I'll tell you. I remember I'd been repressed religiously as a child. I lived in a repressive religious environment. I had never known that. And when I found that out, I was very cross with my parents. There's just a lot of paradox when you're raised in a good Christian home. For example, you learn that sex is dirty and filthy, and you got to save it for the one you love. That's hard for sensitive people to really work out. That's why many of us need glasses. When I needed bifocals, I said, they're right. I discovered a lot of things. I discovered that the feeling of rejection came from my parents, because I was a little kid in the Depression, and they were teachers, and they had to go and teach in other cities, and I was left with my grandparents. And I used to feel bad about that when my doctor and I were talking about it. But, when I think about it, that isn't the way it seemed to me at the time. I recall, as I recall it, that I was the only grandchild they had for hundreds of miles. They were both from Norway, and they'd treat me like a little prince. My grandmother would make homemade root beer in the summertime, which was in the Depression. I would come into the room saying, Grandma, I want some root beer. My grandma would say, oh, look at here. He wants some root beer. Here's some root beer. And my grandpa would say, and here's some cookies, too. When my parents came home, it just went to hell. I want some root beer. Not before dinner. What do you mean, not before dinner? I want some root beer and some cookies. No. Yes! No! What? Why did you go back to where you were? And when they left, it gave me a deep sense of rejection. Cheered me up for a month. One time the doctor said to me, you mean to say, Mr. Emerson, at this time in 1935 you didn't have a bicycle? I said, no. But I got thinking about it on the way home. I wanted to really throw myself deeper into a depression. Let me tell you this. We whine about depressions, but there's something kind of... It's just deliciously painful about a depression. Like you just bring a portable cross and climb up for a while. Don't forgive them, Father. They know what they're doing. I could always throw myself for about 2 months. I used to sit and visualize this little tousled-haired, apple-cheeked, blue-eyed little tyke standing on the streets of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, watching his little friends ride their bicycles to and fro. Don't worry about me. I'll go into psychoanalysis later. I just took me almost 2 months to remember. Nobody in Eau Claire, Wisconsin had a bicycle in 1935. What kid did? We thought he was a freak. We beat him up and broke his bicycle. But I'll tell you, it's one of that doctor's office thing. It's amazing I'm doing as well as I am, for Christ's sake, with the problems I've, I've got a lot of psychological scars. I found out a lot of reasons why. Later on, I was directing the Grand Opera at the University of Texas, one of my other incarnations. And I was working days in an advertising agency, and that was my nighttime job, and I was writing a weekly sports column, and I was going crazy again, and I had to have a new set of answers. I got into metaphysics. And I don't want to tell you about the intricacies of the oneness of self reaching forth to the infinity. I don't want to make you feel inadequate. But at one time, to the best of my knowledge, I was one of 6 people in the state of Texas who knew truth. And that's a very heavy load to carry in that area. In their envy, they put me in the state insane asylum. And there was nothing on my commitment papers that mentioned drinking ever. Just goofy. And then I read Nietzsche, and I've done a lot of things. I've read Schopenhauer, because there's always been my philosophy, I'm sure some of you, if I can just find out why I have these feelings, I'll be okay. And I've spent thousands of dollars and years of my life to find out why. And I want to tell you, maybe, I'm sure a lot of people in this room are seeking that right now. Show me why. Let me tell you some bad news. You can find out why. And it gives you a tremendous feeling of elation. Oh, I know why. Then the feeling of elation goes away. Now you feel crappy, and you know why. And that's the only possible use for this information that I've ever found is late at night in a bar when some guy says, "Hey, what the hell's wrong with you?" And then you can tell him. Turns out they don't want to hear it. I've said this analogy many times, but I've never found a better way to say it. I've lived all my life, most of my life, as though I were on the Titanic. And it hits the iceberg and down it goes. And everybody rows away as fast as they can, and people like me say, "I'm not getting off this baby till I find out why this happened." And you may find out why it makes you feel superior to those pukes in the boat. "You people in the boat, ha 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 ha, I know why." It takes a while to discover knowing why you're going down is of no value. The thing is to get off that sinking ship. But whoever thinks of that. And I've tried a lot of things, but I'll tell you, that's why it was the one thing I took for granted all my life I never paid any attention to. When I couldn't find an adequate therapy, when the therapy would stop working, when I was being, and the thing that's wrong with these kind of emotions that I've had, they're wimp emotions. I detest wimp emotions. I'd rather die with manly emotions than live with wimp emotions. Because wimp emotions, they're like white worms under a rock. You can't ever talk to anybody about it. You can't be standing in a bar and "How are you doing today, Clancy?" "Oh, I'm afraid." What are you afraid of? Beats the shit out of me. Wrong. How are you today? Fine. I don't want people to know that I'm a wimp. I would die. I've been in a lot of barroom fights just because people implied I was a wimp. And I got knocked in my can a lot. But I'll tell you, I'd rather get knocked in my can than have people know that I'm a wimp, because I hate wimps. And I discovered on a ship in Pearl Harbor in 1943 and thereafter something that took me years to identify after I was sober. A few drinks fills my holes better than any therapy I ever had. I know it's transitory. I know it's just false illusion. Call it whatever you want it. But by God, it fills my holes, and when my holes are filled, it seems to me that's the way I should have been all along, and I've been screwed out of it somehow. It never struck me that this was an unusual feeling. It never struck me that human beings don't have full holes. All it told me, as I look back, was that I wasn't getting anywhere. I was just catching up to where they'd been all along. And when my holes are filled, I am a lot different person. I'm secure, I'm confident, I can play with my kids better, I'm not irritable all the time, I'm across. A few years ago, the Nightline did a program on adult children of alcoholics. And they came out, they flew out to Los Angeles and did a view of they interviewed my oldest daughter and I for this program. And when it aired sometime later, she wasn't on it. They had a bunch of whiners on it, but my daughter wasn't on it. She's in her mid-30s. And I called her, I said, Mary, you didn't get on what happened? She said, well, don't you understand? They wanted to hear people whine. What my daughter had said is, my dad was a lot more pleasant when he drank. When he was sober, it was so terrible around the house. Nobody wants to hear that when you're feeling sorry for yourself. But I don't get rejected when my holes are filled. I reject. What a difference that makes in your life. I'm sure some of you men in this room have sat and watched that miracle that sometimes happens to alcoholics late at night in a bar, having a few little drinks and watching some old beast become beautiful by closing time. And I might sidle over to such an old queen and imply there will be delights beyond her comprehension if she'd like to join me in the old Chevy. Now, she would think, now, when my holes are filled, I don't feel rejected. I feel sorry for her. Too bad, bitch. Don't come begging tomorrow. If that would happen to me when my holes were empty, it never did, because I wouldn't be in the bar, but if it did, I guess I'd just go in the washroom and hang myself. That's the difference. That's why I drink. I'm not a drinker. I'm a feeler, and drinking helps me. And the only problem I've ever had in my life is that I have an unfortunate proclivity to overfill my holes from time to time. And my body seems to have no runoff mechanism. And the alcohol goes right to the electrical works, and a new change takes place, one that is less pleasant. And I have at times been accused by judges and police of becoming bizarre. Now, there's nothing wrong with being bizarre when you're a kid. That's kind of fun, you know. So, boy, did we have fun last night. After the prom, we all peed in the hotel lobby. But as you get older, being bizarre gets to be a career handicap, I'll tell you. And from the late 1940s on, I was a booze fighter. I tried quitting, and I realized that didn't help. That made me feel worse. And I drank too much sometimes. That made me feel worse. That leaves you got to find some kind. It's a line to walk, where you drink enough to function, but, to feel like a man when you have to, You can go on the wagon from time to time, but the time eventually comes, you got to get, as the old Frank Sinatra song says, just got to get through that night. And you don't want to drink too much, because people get so out of whack on it. And so I spent a lot of my life as a booze fighter. I didn't realize that if alcohol does what it does for me, I can never win. Who would ever know that? You'd think you could win. And over the years, I had some ups and downs. I would do well for a while and then go to hell and then make a new start and do well for a while. And because all my life, I've been a 50-yard dash man. I'm the best 50-yard dash. When the Olympics were in Los Angeles, 1984, I used to go out every day and look for the A50 and hope there'd be a 50-yard dash. I'd win it. Because whatever you want me to be for 50 yards, I can be it. I could be a husband, I could be a father, I could be an employee, I could be a nice guy, I could be a smarmy, whatever you want. But one day I hit 50 yards and I realized they're using me. And I'm sick of this crap. And I feel the tape that nobody else feels, and I stop. And they all keep going. As it turns out, life is a marathon. There's no 50-yard dash. You just keep doing it. But all my life, I start off with a bang again and again and again. It always goes to hell. I was sent to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in 1949. That's a long time ago. And it was just hideous. A bunch of old fools. I was 22, and I guess I was, by 15 years, the youngest guy in the, somebody said later in that state, the youngest guy in the state by 15. Because they used to be made of old fools, they did. Not as old as I am now, I'm sorry to say. But I went to this meeting, just a bunch of old pukes in their late 30s and 40s sitting there. I thought I was in God's waiting room, just waiting for some big voice to say, next. And they told me about drinking, and they obviously didn't think I was an alcoholic, and I didn't either. But they said, you got to, you're not, I don't say you drank that much when you're that young, and they talked about how much they'd lost. And I went to AA off and on then for the next few years. And after a while, AA was just a place to go, because you got to remember, AA was still rather new, and people didn't know much about it. All they knew was that if you go to AA, they'll eventually help you. And I'd go to AA, and, when everything else was going to hell, you could always go to AA and take the heat off for a while. And I could come back to my wife and say, well, Charlotte, I've gone back to A&A. So, oh, that's wonderful. Maybe it'll help you. And you say, yes, they felt I should taper off. And there wasn't any Al-Anon to screw it up for everybody. Since the birth of Al-Anon, there's never been a moment's peace for anybody anywhere. They did not tell you that. We have the same stuff you do. We know all about it. But AA is a nice place, but there's only two problems that I ever had with AA. I am not an alcoholic, as they define alcoholics. And if I were, religion don't make me well. God, turning my life over to God, ain't going to do nothing for me except send me to hell. AA is a nice place, except I'm not an alcoholic, and their answer doesn't fit. But outside of that, it's a nice place to drop in, wish them well, but I have to find something deeper and more meaningful. Some years later, through a series of bad breaks and misunderstandings, I found myself on Skid Row in Los Angeles. I had no front teeth. They'd been kicked out in the Phoenix drunk tank. That was one of the few mornings that paid for my entire psychoanalysis. I had spent $1,000 in psychoanalysis. I woke up on the floor of the Phoenix drunk tank. I was so sick I couldn't move my head. The guy was kicking my teeth out, screaming at me. I'd vomit down his bunk. And I just had to lay there and take it. But thank God, because of psychoanalysis, I was able to almost instantly identify his problem. I remember just thinking, this son of a bitch is overreacting. And I had just been thrown out of a Skid Row mission. I tried to tell the guy, hey, I'm not really a bum. I'm not really a bum. An ad I wrote, a Board and Elsie Norman ad, was running that week, that month in Life magazine. I've had my picture in the New York Times. I used to be famous. I'm not a bum, but it's hard to explain that in midair. And I stood outside that mission. I was dying. My family was gone. My home was gone. My occupation was gone. My parents had written me off, and I was their only child. Something makes me weep to think how tough it must have been for them. But my father said, he told people he thought I was dead. He'd rather think I was dead than where I was. And everything gone, and I'd lost my front teeth. Now, you can get new families and homes and occupations, but like our book says, we are like men who have lost their front teeth. We never grow new ones, or whatever it says. If any of you are new tonight, I would imagine it's back there where the free seats are. That's where I'd have been when I was new, let me put it that way. Let me give you some hope. If you're having trouble with your teeth or you've lost teeth, you don't know what to do about it, let me give you some hope. When you become entirely spiritual, they grow back. And have your sponsor explain that to you tomorrow. I'll tell you, if a guy would have come along and put a lie detector in my arm and said, are you an alcoholic? As I stood on Skid Row dying, I said, not really. There's something terribly wrong, but I'm not an alcoholic. And that needle wouldn't have quivered a 16th of an inch. And it rained. The next morning, I walked 71 blocks out to the AA club. I'd been asked to leave 2 weeks before. I thought I'll have to hustle these boobs. That's another Texas nut house. I pretend to be an alcoholic finally. And I'll do that here. I'll pretend to be an alcoholic. And I played their sick little game, and I lived in an abandoned car back of the AA club, and I got a sponsor. They always want you to get a sponsor. Try to get a sponsor you can stay away from. They're meddlers are what they are. I had a meddler and a power drunk meddler, which is the worst type of meddler, who did not ever want to sit down and reason with me. I'd talk to him. I said, Bob, you know, I'm not just an idiot. I'm a very brilliant man. Can't we reason? He said, reason? You live in a goddamn abandoned car. Yeah. Well, I don't mind saying there were times when if I would have had the money, I would have called the World Service Office in New York and turned that old fool in. I would have. I just want you to know there's an old timer in Los Angeles killing newcomers. And I'll give you his name and address. And now it's kind of funny. It's a number of years later. When I talk to the World Service Office in New York, I say, no, I'm not. Looks different on this side. But somehow, I was so desperate that old fool got me to take actions I didn't believe in. First few months of my life, I remember the first year was the worst year I felt I ever had. Because even though I'd been down and out, had a lot of bad things happen to me, at least I had maintained some shred of integrity by at least doing what I believed in. And he insisted I do things I not believed in, that he believed in. And it made me crazy. Because I got nothing, nothing's getting any better, and now I'm selling out too. It really is terrible. Go over and say you're sorry to that lady. Oh, did you hear what she called me? I don't care. Go and say you're sorry. Sorry, I called you a bitch. You bitch. Yeah, on. Make amends to people that screwed me around terribly. Just on and on. And I'll tell you, something over a period of time, one day I got fired as a dishwasher. I felt so bad I was going to kill myself. I couldn't make it to the ocean. That rotten sponsor took advantage of me and took that pain and made me write an inventory instead of committing suicide. And as a result of writing that inventory, nothing changed. It just went on and on. that's the trouble when you're new in AA. It isn't as though you're getting some stream of consciousness. You get little pieces of information, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, but they don't fit anything else you've got here. Well, I'm glad I got that. That doesn't fit anything I've ever heard of before. And you wind up with a board full of nothing that fits. You got a lot of data. What's the use? And then one day you get a piece about 3 of them fit into it. Then you're on your way. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Why, it's a horsey. You go like hell with it. But it's a hell of a long wait to find out it's a horsey, I'll tell you that. But somewhere along that line, I changed, and I didn't have to drink. And by the time I was a year sober, I was still sober. And now in 3 or 4 months, if I should survive, I hope I will. It'll be 30 years since the day I walked off Skid Row without having had a drink or a pill or any medications since then. And I eventually held jobs again. I eventually became somewhat successful. I got into radio and television in Hollywood and got into big corporations. And my wife and all those children heard the crinkle of green all the way to a post office box in Dallas. Fled to my side, attached themselves to me like a group of starving chiggers. Shortly thereafter, still another child came. He's home from college. He's graduated from college this year. He's a big lump, and I keep thinking he was my little AA baby. I say, Clancy, go to your room. Clean your room. It's a mess. You can't get in there. I forget. You just want to hear it. Someday he's going to turn and say, and I'm going to say, oh, hell, kid, I'll do it. Didn't see you were busy, huh? But, no, it's a nice story, and I'm successful. I'm well now. I'm feeling good, and doing good. Great. Now, there's only one thing if you're kind of new tonight. The most important thing I've said tonight, or I'll say before I sit down, is this. Nobody paid any attention to it. I said, my name is Clancy Imislund, and I'm an alcoholic. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but that's the single most difficult thing I've ever had to come to believe in my life. I can say I'm an alcoholic, but I never really believed it. I never believed I was an alcoholic when I drank. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic when I got sober. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic after I got sober. Somewhere along the line, I began to understand the nature of my illness. The one problem that always offended me, and it seems to offend a great many people. How can you be an alcoholic when your problem really isn't alcohol? It is, kind of, but it isn't. You know, other people have problems that's all due to alcohol. My problems are sometimes due to alcohol, but when I think about it, that isn't it. How can I say I'm an alcoholic? I'm glad I survived and took actions here and followed directions as abysmally as I did with the worst of motives, but I took the actions little by little because the old fool intimidated me. To survive long enough to discover the most important single sentence I know about my life today, or ever. I'm going to say this slowly. If you're new, it's going to sound very upside down to you. I had to survive here in Alcoholics Anonymous long enough to discover if my problem is alcohol, I am not an alcoholic. And conversely, if I'm an alcoholic, my problem is not alcohol. You say, well, that's dumb, that's stupid. I firmly believe it. I believed it. I believe it more every year. I believe that's what this book is about. I believe I'm one of the few people, I'm sure there are a few here, but I'm one of the few people who had a chance to sit and talk with Bill Wilson in his office for an hour about it, and that's what he felt. But you say, well, what the hell? Of course it's alcohol. Let me tell you something. I can disprove that in 10 seconds. If the problem is alcohol, detoxes turn out winners. And they don't. Hospitals turn out winners. And they don't. Treatment facilities, no matter how good, turn out winners. And they don't. Jails turn out winners. Toilets turn out winners. That is not correct. Then what is the problem? What the hell is it if it isn't alcohol? It doesn't sound... Well, it's something that sounds like alcohol, and we talk a lot about drinking in our meetings, so we get confused. And well-intentioned non-alcoholics who work in the field of alcoholism have difficulty making this separation. But it isn't alcohol. It is something called alcoholism. And the difference between an alcohol problem and the disease of alcoholism has many ramifications, but you can settle it in 1 minute. A couple of years ago, some group of psychiatrists asked me to fly down to Orlando, Florida from Los Angeles to talk for an hour on the difference between alcohol problems and the disease of alcoholism. And I really felt kind of ashamed because I could have told them over the telephone in 1 minute. But I thought, if I do that, I'll never get to Disney World. So I went down there and gave them an hour's worth of flash, left their eyes going around like BBs in the saucer, you know. What's he talking about, Fred? You know. But I can tell you in 1 minute, I can tell you in 1 sentence. The difference is this, as far as you and I are concerned. An alcohol problem is overcome by stopping drinking. In this strange, denigrating, destructive thing called alcoholism, you will discover stopping drinking has no significant effect except to gradually make your life so emotionally painful you can't stand it. Not funny. The curse of alcoholism is unbearable sobriety. If stopping drinking, the answer would all be home free. But even that doesn't make you an alcoholic. Medically, that makes you an intense neurotic, an acute neurotic, someone who lives in reality but reacts badly to it, obsessively, emotionally, immaturely, all the sensitively, all the things that go into it. There's millions of people like that who are not alcoholic. Something else must be present. Alcohol has to have a special effect on you. We always hear that in meetings. You know, we all know that. You know, Christ Almighty. You know. But what is that special effect? That's where the rub comes in. Sometimes you hear speakers say something like, I stayed drunk around the clock for 30 years. Didn't draw a sober breath. You think, now that guy's an alcoholic. But let me give you some news. After a sober while working in medical corporation, I discovered it is physically impossible for a human body to stay intoxicated 14 days and nights in a laboratory. You can't stay drunk. That's one of the rottenest parts about being a drinker. You keep sobering up again and again and again and again. You don't even have to want to. As has been said by medical students who study alcohol, medical practitioners, they say things like, an alcoholic will eventually induce sufficient alcoholic toxicity to set up a series of physiologically conditioned reflexes, reducing the toxicity by inducing a procedure called reverse peristalsis. We call that puking here. I bet there aren't very many people in this room who haven't knelt in front of the old altar in the morning and gazed into those shiny waters and say your morning prayer. Oh, God. You hardly ever stop and think you're getting a free detox. You know. Look, Margie, this won't show up on the insurance. Some mornings when you're sick enough, your body will reduce toxicity from both ends at once. That's good for your body, but it's hell on your nerves, I'll tell you. Not only are you terribly sick, but you're called upon to make a series of split-second decisions. You know. Really? Yes. And every answer must be right. Staying drunk is not the mark of an alcoholic. Well, maybe if you're an alcoholic, you can't handle alcohol. That sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Alcoholics can't handle alcohol very well. False. Tests have studied, and your memory should tell you, alcoholics handle alcohol better than social drinkers in almost any situation. If you ever been to a party with social drinkers and you all drank the same, I'd almost bet you would drive them home. Of course, you can't ever get them to drink the same, the boobs. They say things like, oh, no more for me, I'm starting to feel it. You know? The answer to that is, fail this, wimp. Worst year of the year to be out, worst night of the year, New Year's Eve, because there's amateur drunks out there. All of I don't know if they have roadblocks down here, but we do in California. Every Christmas, you stopping drivers. It's not to catch people like you and me. It's to catch people who are out there on their annual drunk in their car, hitting trees and parked cars. While decent citizens like you and I sit behind them and say, "Hurry up there." That's it. Gooch. Gooch. Maybe if you're an alcoholic, you act bizarrely. That's how you tell an alcoholic. False. Almost every working day of my life now, I see alcoholics die. I don't mean die figuratively. I mean die where we put a blanket on them and get them out of there to the morgue. I probably see more alcoholic deaths than all the people in this room combined. And I see alcoholics go insane. And some of these men have never been bizarre once. I watched them go for years till they die. They've never been bizarre once. Just the opposite. They get so withdrawn they become catatonic. We hear a lot of bizarre stories in AA because that's more interesting. So we ask people with bizarre stories to be our speakers. But a lot of people have never been bizarre once. Housewives, guys who are very quiet, never been bizarre once, and they die from it. While the bizarre ones are out being colorful. What is it then? What the hell is it that makes an alcoholic? What is the special effect? What does alcohol do to me that it doesn't do to my parents, didn't do to my parents, doesn't do to my wife, doesn't do to all my children who've grown up, doesn't do to my grandchildren? I have a granddaughter in college, and she's still straight. I'll tell you, we were talking about this last night after the meeting. It's discouraging. I go around to conventions, and I hear people say again and again things like, my daughter Patty, is got 4 years on the program, and little Jimmy has got 2 years, and Fred is in treatment. We're all just a big AA family. And people cry, it's so beautiful, and I go home with those goddamn straight kids of mine that say, what's wrong with you? When I was your age, I was in the insane asylum. Rotten little sneaks. What is the effect that changes me from all the bells of my family? I never would have guessed this in 1,000 years, and I don't think anybody else would have. Turns out it doesn't do what it does to me at all. Just the opposite. It's what it does for me, not to me. By the time it does something to me, it's much too late. What does it do for me that it doesn't do for them? It almost instantly changes my perception of reality. And it turns out it doesn't do that for most people. It almost instantly makes me taller and more self-contained, and them smaller and less threatening. It almost instantly fills my holes. And if it does that, I don't care. I've been working with narcotics addicts of various kinds for over a quarter of a century. I've never heard of a narcotic that works as effectively as alcohol does on an alcoholic. Cocaine gets you up and paranoid. Heroin gets you down, but you have to overdose pretty soon to get anywhere you're going. Alcohol puts you in the middle with your holes full. Come on, baby. Sometimes it makes me just shudder when you see people in AA who are alcoholics say, I don't really think I'm an alcoholic. I think I'm just a situational drinker. I don't know anybody who's an alcoholic who could stand to be a non-alcoholic. Can you imagine what it must have been like for all those people all those years? Had your back to the wall and the hounds of fate ripping at your throat, thinking, I gotta have a drink. You'd have it go. Oh, no more for that. 93% of people who drink alcohol will never know what you and I take for granted. Just assume it. Alcohol doesn't go to me. My back's to the wall. It goes. Bring on your goddamn hound, Mrs. Baskerville. Nothing changes, but everything changes. And it turns out that eventually alcohol does something to you. But by that time, whatever power you had to cope with it disappears. That's why they always say when you get sober, you almost pick up where you were when it started working. Because you don't have to grow in your emotions anymore. You can change the case. And that's why most people, as they die of alcoholism, and still over 95% of people do, die convinced of one thing. I'm not really an alcoholic, you see, because my problem wasn't really alcohol. It was all these other things that you wouldn't understand. But even if that's called alcoholism. But even if that works, how could you be in AA if you're not religious? How could you be in AA when they want to... I've met a lot of people who don't want to be around measures of God. My particular case was that I was given too much of a religious education to be able to believe in God. Because if God existed, I was damned. And I did not go for that. And a lot of people have a lot of problems with God. And you go to AA and the South, when I lived in the South, that just made me crazy because they said, been saying here this weekend, I'm sure it must offend some of you newer people. I understand the reason now, but when I was new, I hated it. Because my name is Fred, and through the grace of God, I no longer drink, or I haven't had a drink since such and such a date. And if that's the case, AA can't work for people like me. Because the grace of God doesn't fall down on people like me. And that's why it's kind of, over the year, in my first years, I ground away. People are saying to me, you should return to God. I'm not going to return to God. And my sponsor, remember one time saying to me, said, don't you believe in God, kid? I said, no. He said, you believe in Alcoholics Anonymous? I said, no, not really. He says, do you think I'm doing better than you are? I said, I guess you are. He says, congratulations, I'm your new higher power. And he became my higher power. And a lot of people were very offended. You can't have a human as your higher power. Let me tell you something. You can have whatever you can have to be your higher power. If you're having trouble, you better find something you can believe in. Because I'd rather have you find something you believe in and believe in it than pretend to believe in something you don't believe in. Because it gets to be 2 o'clock in the morning and you've got to turn to something you believe in. If you've been shucking them, you're dead. But I did things that old sponsor wouldn't do for anybody else. I didn't do it out of love or respect. I just did it to get them off my back half the time. But little by little, somewhere along the line, my attitude changed, my perceptions changed. And a few years ago, some guy was saying to me, he said, when did you, I hear you talk about God once in a while. When did you ever return to God? And I had to think about that, because I've been praying without fail every night for well over a quarter of a century, and most mornings and a lot of times. And I've never had any problem with God for years and years and years. It happened imperceptibly. I don't know how it happened. And I was telling this guy, I said, I have to think about that. And I gradually recreated little by little in my early years of sobriety what happened in my life. And if you're new tonight, this is only my opinion, but it's, you can either accept or reject it. Who cares? But how can you return to a God that you already know about and is going to, if you'll accept it, you're not the kind of God you want to be around anyway? As my sponsor pointed out to me one time, and I was very glad, he says, kid, nowhere in AA does it say you return to God. You look at those steps, why don't you just read the black part of the steps instead of what you think? He says, it never says you return to anything. Some people want to return to normal living. A goof like you wouldn't even want to do that. Yeah. You don't return to anything. You come to believe in something. But it all still goes back to this, doesn't it? God somewhere is saying, because you hear it around these meetings, you can stay sober, you can't. You too can, you can't. Is that the way God operates? You hear people say, look at those people dying on the sidewalk. But for the grace of God, I would be on that sidewalk. Where's God's grace for them, for Christ's sake? Does God just select special people and give them grace? I can't live with that kind of a God. It's a tough battle. Somewhere along the line, as I begin to change, my perceptions change, I guess, little by little. And over a period of time, one of the things I recall, I begin to feel, that maybe, despite what anybody said, it is as people say it is. That if a power does exist, that means well for me. And if he has any grace, it's either got to fall on everybody or nobody. It can't just fall on isolated individuals. That to me is the height of egotism. God wants me to stay sober and wants them to die. I could not accept that. Because one day, what if God wanted me to die tomorrow? Not have to lay there and vomit. There's got to be something more than that. So I had to come to believe that God's grace fell on everybody. But what does AA got to do with it? Why Thursday night when I went home from work did I just have to step over a man dying to get in my car? Does he not have God's grace? When I come into work Monday morning or Tuesday morning after the 4th, and I see the people who have died, and the people who have been stabbed, and the people who died from hypothermia, and all the people who die where I am, does that mean God has got no grace for them? If it means that, how can you believe in such a God? So God has to believe in everything. God's grace has to fall on everybody. But how can it fall on everybody when people are... What has AA got to do with this? If it's God's grace, I don't need to go to all these damn steps. I don't have to do these things. Do what I wanted. I thought of an analogy, I guess, 27 or 29 years ago. And I thought about it this afternoon or this morning. After the meeting, I went up to my room and I was watching the Wimbledon finals, semifinals. And NBC is sending out that picture of the Wimbledon finals all over the world. Clear, sharp, bright, intense, everything perfect. There's a lot of people who didn't even have it on. There's a lot of people who have it on cheap, flawed sets and the pictures are bad. A lot of people who get it in black and white. Some people don't even know what the hell their sets are doing. Some sets are broken. But that's not NBC. That's the receiver. I little by little began to contemplate that perhaps maybe God is sending out a clear, sharp picture of grace. If you have a little difficult with the word grace, as I used to do, call it something else. Maybe he's sending out a picture of peace of mind or serenity or some kind of thing. But he's sending it out to everybody. He doesn't care if you're a Sanyo or a GE or a Suzuki set. He wants you to have a picture. Then why don't you get it? Because a lot of people don't have their TV sets on. Well, some people have their wiring crossed. I know that I love TV and I watch a lot of football, a lot of sports. I have a little grandson, one of my newer grandsons named John. He's just old enough to come by those TVs. I have two of them side by side. I will miss two when there are two games on Sunday. And he comes by and I turn my head and he just gives all the knobs a whip, you know. If I wasn't a nice old grandpa, I'd kill a little shit. Over the years, with him and my other grandchildren, I've learned how to redress these imbalances quickly. Now, when I see the picture going like that, I have no idea what electronic phenomenon is going on. But I know if I turn the horizontal or vertical hold, it stops. And if their faces are blue, that doesn't tell me anything, except I know how to turn the color knob. And if we're going like this, it's the horizontal. I'm a master. He has another trick, too. He's learned how to hide my car keys and is not old enough to tell me where. He may make it to 4, but he may not. But, now, I don't know what the hell makes those knobs what they do, but I know they make the picture come in. And in a real sense, I was able to identify it that way. I don't know what AA's actions are doing. I don't know what the hell they're for. I really don't know. But I know when I turn the prayer, I could not guarantee to you today that any prayer I've ever said has gotten out of the room in which I said it. I've never done it. But I know this. When I turn that button, the picture gets a little clearer. When I stop in my busy schedule to stop and listen to someone's woes that bore me out of my wits at the moment, and I got more important things to do, but I tap and turn that knob, it makes the picture a little bit better. When I have my telephone listed in the telephone book so people can call me all hours of the night and whine, it makes the picture a little bit clearer. There's a lot of pictures here. When I made amends to my father and my mother, and they didn't want to hear them. It took me 2 years. Then we were very close for 25 years. But it made that picture clear a lot. On and on. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me. It has enabled me from time to time to redress the knobs that have kept me from getting a picture. Once upon a time I said, there's no transmitter. Then I said, there's a transmitter, but the picture's crappy. But now I've had some good pictures every so often. The only thing wrong is that, as an Alcoholics member, I guess, it's as though my TV set is riding on the back of a pickup truck. Every time I get that baby tuned in, it pulls me out. Shit! On and on. But I have no difficulty, and I haven't any difficulty for many, many years, accepting the concept of God's grace. Because it is no longer a selective thing that is only given to others. It's given to me if I choose to use it. What I call meditation sometimes, I guess some people wouldn't call meditation. I don't spend hours in a dark room meditating. That makes me suicidal. But I stop during the day, and I remember just a little thing like in the middle of a freeway traffic jam, just stopping and think, God really means good for me. This traffic jam has nothing to do with God's grace. It means there's some drivers up there who are stuck, that's all. They're going crazy. It's hard to remember that sometimes. All the vicissitudes of life. But I'm still very emotional. I have to fight this all the time. I know I was very fortunate in 1970 to be asked to speak at the International Convention at Long Beach, or Miami Beach. And the first speaker of the morning was the guy who took me to my first meeting in 1949 in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. The last speaker that was my current sponsor, a guy named Chuck C. I was the noon speaker on the 4th of July, Independence Day, and I had a spiritual breakthrough that just, when I got home, I thought, no more tempestuousness, no more crossness. I was working at a big advertising agency. It's going to be a new day. Clancy I is going to be something to be kindly Clancy I. And I got on that freeway to go downtown and went on the San Diego freeway, and some little old lady in a Toyota came off and just about killed me. And the new spiritual leader of the West had his window down. You crazy bitch! And I got that Toyota! God damn you! And I chased her. But what AA has enabled me to do, folks, I no longer have to chase people past my exit. If I haven't caught him by 4th Street, good flying, Red Baron, we'll meet again. And when I do catch him, I can't do anything, but I can just go by him and give him a ray. So it's kind of an amazing thing. I stumbled to action into the idea that I can get a better picture if I continue to do these things. There's one more thing I want to say, and I've been saying it a lot recently because I think it so strongly. Today, in 1988, as when I got sober in 1958, as when I first came to AA in 1949, as in all the years since, and I presume all the years before that, there are various people within our ranks. They act as the typhoid Marys of AA. Somehow they stay here for a time, peddling disaffection for AA. And they say things like, now listen, AA is okay. That's a good way to get sober. We all know that. But if you have intense emotions, deep emotional problems, you need something more than AA. They mean well, but they just don't understand. Let me suggest therapy X, or some people advocate medication Y, or here's a different program where you can learn and discover it was your parents' fault, or on and on and on. And this is necessary if you have deep emotional problems. And it really sounds good. Let me say this. I've been in jail 34 times. Not a world's record, but it's good for an executive. I have been in city hospitals. I've been chained in the city hospital while my wife came in, had a baby, and went home again. And I was still there. I have been in the Veterans Hospital in Wood, Wisconsin, in a padded cell, cold sober. I have been committed to spend up to the rest of my life in the Texas State Insane Asylum as a hopeless schizophrenic. I think I can speak for the emotionally disturbed. Speaking on behalf of the emotionally disturbed, let me say this. Alcoholics Anonymous, as it is now and has been, with its involvements, with its sponsors, hopefully that intimidate you a little bit more than a chum, with its actions, with its opportunities to get out of self, with its functions that you can do even on days you don't believe in it. Alcoholics Anonymous, as it is, works and works well at least 29 years and 9 months. It may not work any longer than that for people like me. I know it does for Liz. I don't know if it does for me, but I think it does. I'll let you know. But I suggest that you not run off until you've done these things for 29 years and 9 months and see how it goes. And probably the nicest thing that I've been able to say when I think about where I've come from and what's happened to me, the nice thing about you stay sober and you feel better than the people who are telling you it doesn't work. That's the number one fact. But the nicest thing I can tell you tonight is the Tennessee State AA Convention would be something that wouldn't make any sense at all, ordinarily. Just to stand up here feeling possession in my right mind and secure and confident and say to you that my name is CLancy Imislund and I'm an alcoholic. And through the grace of God, I need never drink. Thank you. See, I got you to do it. And then in 1954,
CLancy, I don't know whether you're getting better. Don't you want 3? More's better. I want to thank you, CLancy. It was good for all of us, in particular me. Miss Jennifer, would you like to come up? I don't know what to say other than thank you after that.
You will.